You fall in love with a face, but your soul recognizes an ancient character, the same mother who never came, the father who was always leaving, the hero you've been waiting for since childhood. What if every relationship is actually a theater where invisible actors perform the same eternal play? What if we don't choose who we love, but rather wounded archetypes within us choose their missing counterparts? There's a secret choreography happening beneath every attraction, every fight, every breakup, a dance of mythological figures that your conscious mind never invited to the stage. Somewhere inside you carry the imprint of the mother who was too busy to see you, the father who taught love through absence, the hero who saved everyone except themselves. These figures don't live in your past. They live in your nervous system, in your patterns of choosing, in the way your heart races when someone embodies their familiar energy. You've probably noticed it, how you keep attracting the same emotional dynamic, wearing different faces. The partner who needs saving, the one who feels emotionally unreachable, the one who loves you intensely but chaotically. Different people, same archetypal roles, different scripts, same underlying mythology. This isn't about broken patterns that need fixing. This is about sacred repetition. Your soul's attempt to heal ancient wounds through symbolic reunion. You don't randomly attract difficult people. You magnetize the archetypes your psyche needs to integrate. Carl Jung called this the compensatory function of the unconscious, how we unconsciously seek what our ego rejects, how we fall in love with our own hidden fragments projected onto another's body. Love becomes an alchemical process where two incomplete mythologies attempt to birth one whole story. But here's what most people miss. The archetype you're attracted to isn't your destiny, it's your assignment. Every relationship is an invitation to reclaim the lost parts of yourself that you've been seeking in others. The mother who never nurtured, the father who never protected, the hero who never arrived, the villain who taught you that love and pain are synonymous. They're all inside you, waiting to be integrated rather than repeatedly projected onto the people you love. But there's one archetype that hides so well, you might not even recognize it's running your love life. She learned to love by rescuing. At 7, she was already mothering her alcoholic father, translating his slurred apologies to her younger siblings. At 17, she was the friend everyone called at 3 a.m. when their world was falling apart. At 27, she married a man whose depression became her sacred mission. "I can fix him," she would whisper to herself, as if love was a rehabilitation program and she was the designated healer. There's an ancient Greek myth about Psyche, who falls in love with Eros but is forbidden to see his face. Night after night she lies beside her invisible lover, touching him in darkness, never allowed to witness his true form. When she finally lights a candle to look at him, he vanishes. The hero archetype works the same way. It thrives in darkness, in the mysterious promise that your love can transform someone else's wound. The moment you truly see the person beneath your rescuing fantasy, the spell breaks. Because you weren't in love with them. You were in love with being needed. Neuroscientist Dr. Helen Fisher discovered that when we're in hero mode in relationships, our brains release dopamine not from receiving love, but from the anticipation of earning it. The rescue becomes the reward. The wound becomes the sacred site where you prove your worthiness. This is trauma bonding disguised as virtue. The child who learned that love equals service grows into an adult who confuses exhaustion with devotion. You don't feel loved unless you're actively saving someone. Rest feels like abandonment of them and of the identity that kept you safe in childhood. Do you recognize this? The way your heart races when someone reveals their brokenness to you, how you feel most alive when someone else is falling apart and needs you to catch them, the strange emptiness that comes when a relationship becomes easy. You might have learned that your pain doesn't matter unless it's in service of someone else's healing, that your needs are selfish unless they're disguised as someone else's salvation. Here's what the hero archetype doesn't want you to see. Rescuing others is often an elaborate avoidance of your own vulnerability. It's easier to focus on their chaos than to sit with your own unprocessed grief. It's safer to be the strong one than to risk being the one who needs saving. The hero complex isn't born from abundance. It's born from a deep, wordless terror of being abandoned if you're not useful, of being left alone with the parts of yourself that feel unlovable without a cape on. First CTA mid-video. If this resonates with the quiet corners of your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What patterns are you beginning to recognize in your own love story? Your sharing helps others feel less alone in their archetypal awakening. But the hero isn't the only invisible character orchestrating your relationships. There's another archetype that's even more hidden, even more powerful. In her dreams, she was always feeding someone, preparing endless meals for people who never seemed satisfied, stirring pots that never emptied, setting tables that grew longer each time she looked. She would wake up exhausted, as if she had been working all night. Her relationships followed the same pattern. She became the emotional caterer, anticipating needs before they were spoken, absorbing moods like a psychic sponge, turning herself into whatever nourishment her partner seemed to lack. The ancient Celts spoke of the Morrigan, a triple goddess who could appear as maiden, mother, or crone, but also as crow, feeding on the battlefield of love. She nurtured and devoured in the same breath, gave life and took it away. This is the shadow side of the mother archetype that psychology rarely discusses. You learn to love by becoming indispensable. Your worth is measured by how much you can give, how much pain you can absorb, how many needs you can anticipate before they're even conscious. But underneath the endless giving is a quiet desperation. If I stop feeding them, will they leave? Dr. Marion Woodman, Jungian analyst, identified this as the devouring mother complex, where nurturing becomes a strategy for emotional survival rather than authentic care. The nervous system gets wired to equate love with depletion. Boundaries feel like cruelty. Saying no feels like a betrayal of your essential nature. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's an unconscious survival pattern. The child who learned that their emotional needs were too much grows into an adult who makes themselves small enough to fit into other people's lives. You become the space where others can be messy, difficult, demanding, because chaos feels familiar and calm feels like abandonment. She noticed it first in how she cooked, always making too much food, as if feeding an invisible crowd. Her refrigerator became a museum of leftovers, evidence of love that went uneaten. She would stand in front of the open fridge at midnight, staring at containers full of care that no one had requested. Her relationships mirrored this pattern. She was always emotionally overfeeding people, sending long texts when they wanted space, offering solutions when they needed silence, giving advice when they craved presence. Love became another form of overflowing, another way of being too much for spaces that were too small. Here's the paradox the wounded mother doesn't want to face. The very nurturing that feels like love often suffocates the authentic connection it's trying to create. People don't leave because you don't give enough. They leave because they can't breathe in the space where your needs have been erased. The terrifying truth? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop loving so hard. Stop rescuing. Stop anticipating. Stop being the emotional mother to adults who never asked for adoption. You might recognize this in your body. The way your chest tightens when someone you love seems distant. How you automatically scan rooms for who needs what. The exhaustion that lives in your bones from carrying emotional weight that was never yours to lift. The way you feel guilty for having needs, angry when your endless giving isn't appreciated, confused when people say you're too much, even though you've been trying so hard to be exactly what they need. The invitation isn't to stop caring. It's to learn the difference between authentic nurturing and anxious feeding. To notice when you're giving from fullness versus giving from the terror of being left. To remember that love isn't a performance of usefulness, it's a space where both people can exist without having to earn their place. But what happens when the mother archetype collides with its opposite, the energy that taught you that love and distance are synonymous? He was physically there but emotionally absent, present at dinner tables but missing from conversations, in the house but never really home. You learned to read his moods like weather patterns, the silence that meant anger, the distance that meant disappointment, the way he could fill a room with emptiness. Now, decades later, you find yourself attracted to people who love you from a distance, who are generous with everything except their emotional presence, who make you work for scraps of authentic connection, the same way you once worked for fragments of his approval. In Greek mythology, Kronos devoured his children to prevent them from overthrowing him. But there's another version of this story that psychology rarely explores. The father who devours his children's emotional needs, not through cruelty, but through chronic unavailability, who teaches love as something that must be earned, never freely given. The absent father archetype lives in your nervous system as a constant question: am I worthy of being chosen? You attract partners who withhold just enough to keep that question alive, who give you 70% of their presence and make you believe that if you just try harder, become better, prove yourself more completely, you'll finally earn the remaining 30%. She thought she was choosing strong, independent partners, men who didn't need her, who had their own lives, their own passions, their own emotional worlds. She told herself this was healthy, finally dating someone who wasn't clingy or needy. But in quiet moments, she recognized the familiar ache, the way she found herself performing competence to earn attention, becoming more interesting, more accomplished, more useful, hoping that eventually she would be fascinating enough to warrant their full presence. She was still the little girl waiting for Daddy to look up from his newspaper and really see her. Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory reveals how early experiences with emotionally unavailable caregivers wire our autonomic nervous system to equate love with activation. Your body learns to interpret calm, available love as boring or untrustworthy. The sympathetic nervous system becomes addicted to the chase, the uncertainty, the constant work of earning affection. This creates what psychologists call anxious attachment seeking, where you feel most alive in relationships that keep you slightly off balance, where love feels real only when it requires effort, where easy affection triggers suspicion rather than relief. You might notice this pattern in how you respond to texts, the immediate anxiety when someone takes longer to respond, the way your heart races when someone seems distant, and how you automatically assume you've done something wrong. The relief that floods your system when they finally give you attention, a relief so intense it feels like coming home, or how you interpret consistency as lack of passion, how partners who are emotionally available feel too easy or somehow inauthentic, how you confuse the absence of chaos with the absence of love. The absent father archetype doesn't want you to see this. You're not attracted to unavailable people because you're broken. You're attracted to them because your soul is trying to master an old wound, trying to prove that this time you can be worthy enough to make someone stay. But here's the initiatory lesson hidden in this pattern. You cannot heal abandonment by preventing it. You cannot cure emotional unavailability by becoming irresistible. The father wound lives in you, not in the people you choose. And it can only be healed by becoming the emotionally present parent to yourself that you never had. The invitation is to notice when you're working for love versus receiving it. To feel the difference in your body between connection that flows naturally and connection that requires constant effort. To recognize that easy love isn't boring love. It's the love your nervous system is finally ready to receive. But sometimes the archetype that captured us isn't distant. It's intoxicatingly present in all the wrong ways. They hurt you in the most exquisite ways, with words that cut precisely where you were already tender, with silences that lasted just long enough to make you question your worth, with love that came in waves, overwhelming when present, devastating when absent. You told yourself you were strong for staying, that you were loving them through their darkness. But in the sacred honesty of 3 a.m., you knew the truth. You weren't just enduring the pain, you were addicted to it. In Sufi mysticism, there's a story of a moth that falls in love with flame. Night after night, she dances closer to the fire, each encounter burning away another piece of her wings. Other moths warn her, but she cannot explain the ecstasy of being consumed by something so beautiful and dangerous. The beloved villain archetype works the same way. They become the sacred flame that simultaneously destroys and illuminates. You don't love them despite their capacity to hurt you. You love them because of it. Because pain, when it comes from someone you adore, feels like the most intimate form of attention. Neuroscientist Dr. Helen Fisher's research on love addiction reveals that intermittent reinforcement, love that comes unpredictably, creates the same dopamine patterns as cocaine addiction. Your brain literally craves the chaos because the relief, when it comes, feels like salvation. The person who hurts you and then tenderly bandages the wound becomes your drug dealer and your doctor. The very hand that breaks you is the only one that can put you back together. This creates what trauma specialists call betrayal bonding, where your nervous system confuses intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion. I remember the way my chest would tighten whenever their name appeared on my phone. Not from joy, from a terrible anticipation. Would this be the message that saved me or destroyed me? The hypervigilance that came with loving someone who could switch from tender to cruel without warning. I told myself I was teaching them how to love, that my patience would eventually heal their wounds. But really I was teaching myself that love should hurt, that if it didn't require recovery time, it wasn't real. That safe love was somehow shallow love. Here's what the beloved villain archetype reveals about us. We often unconsciously seek partners who mirror our own internal relationship with ourselves. If you have a harsh inner critic, you'll magnetize people who criticize you externally. If you carry shame, you'll attract those who activate it. The villain isn't just someone who happens to hurt you. They're often a perfect representation of your own self-attack patterns made flesh. They say out loud what your inner voice whispers. They treat you externally how you treat yourself internally. Do you recognize this? The way your body learned to interpret emotional turbulence as passion. How calm relationships feel boring because your nervous system is wired for dramatic peaks and valleys. The strange comfort of familiar pain versus the anxiety of unfamiliar peace. The way you find yourself defending someone who hurts you, explaining their behavior to friends who can see clearly what you cannot. How you've become fluent in the language of walking on eggshells, of managing someone else's emotional weather while losing track of your own climate. The deepest teaching hidden in the beloved villain pattern is this. They are often our unconscious trainers in self-advocacy. Every boundary they cross is an invitation for you to discover where your limits live. Every wound they inflict is a question about your own self-worth. They cannot heal until you stop trying to love them into wholeness. And you cannot heal until you stop outsourcing your self-worth to someone who treats it carelessly. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for a villain is to refuse to be their victim. The path forward isn't about avoiding all difficult people. It's about learning to differentiate between someone who challenges you to grow and someone who asks you to shrink, between love that expands you and love that requires you to abandon yourself to receive it. But individual archetypes are only part of the story. What happens when two people meet and their unconscious mythologies begin to dance? They met at a coffee shop, but their souls recognized each other from an ancient theater. She, the eternal rescuer drawn to broken wings. He, the beautiful wreckage, magnetized to those who promised to fix what was unfixable. Neither knew they were auditioning for roles written in their childhood wounds. She saw a poet who needed saving. He saw a savior who needed breaking. The dance began before their first kiss, an unconscious choreography of victim and healer, pursued and pursuer, the one who gives too much and the one who takes just enough to keep her giving. In Hindu mythology, Shiva and Shakti dance the eternal cosmic dance, he the destroyer, she the creator. But their union isn't harmony, it's dynamic tension, creation and destruction spiraling around each other, each needing the other to complete the cosmic cycle. Most relationships unknowingly reenact this archetypal polarity, the giver and the taker, the pursuer and the distancer, the chaos bringer and the peacekeeper, the dreamer and the realist. You don't randomly fall in love, you magnetically align with your missing archetypal half. Research by Dr. John Gottman reveals that couples often have complementary nervous system patterns. The high-anxiety partner unconsciously seeks the low-anxiety partner to regulate their system, while the emotionally shut-down partner seeks the emotionally expressive one to feel alive again. But here's the trap. What initially attracts becomes what ultimately frustrates. She falls in love with his calm groundedness, then resents his emotional unavailability. He's drawn to her passionate intensity, then feels overwhelmed by her needs. The very qualities that created the magnetic pull become the source of the deepest conflicts. Maria was the family translator, turning her father's rage into explanations her siblings could understand. She learned to alchemize chaos into clarity. David grew up in a house of careful silences, where emotions were dangerous eruptions to be avoided. He learned to disappear when feelings got too loud. When they met, her chaos felt like finally being alive to his dormant system. His stillness felt like sanctuary to her overstimulated nervous system. But 3 years later, she was exhausted from carrying all the emotional labor, and he was suffocating from the constant demand to feel more, say more, be more present. Dr. Harville Hendricks calls this the unconscious marriage, how we unconsciously choose partners who will activate our deepest wounds while simultaneously offering the promise of healing them. The person who triggers your abandonment issues might also be the one who can teach you secure attachment if you're willing to stay conscious during the process. The archetypal dance isn't a mistake, it's an invitation. Each person embodies the disowned part of the other's psyche. The overgiver needs to learn healthy selfishness. The emotional withholder needs to learn vulnerable expression. The relationship becomes a laboratory for reclaiming split-off aspects of the self. You might recognize this in the magnetic pull towards someone whose energy feels both familiar and foreign. The way you're drawn to people who embody what you've rejected in yourself. How you judge them for qualities you secretly long to possess, or admire them for expressing what you've learned to suppress. The silent partner judging the emotional one for being too much, while secretly envying their freedom to feel. The chaotic one criticizing the stable one for being boring, while craving their inner peace. The highest potential of archetypal relationships isn't finding someone who completes you, it's allowing the relationship to reveal where you're incomplete within yourself. Instead of trying to change your partner into your missing half, you learn to develop that half within yourself. The overgiver learns to receive. The emotional withholder learns to express. The chaos bringer learns stillness. The peacekeeper learns to embrace healthy conflict. The relationship stops being about two halves trying to make a whole and becomes about two whole people choosing to dance. But what happens when the dance becomes an obsession? When the archetypal pull feels less like growth and more like possession, there's a dimension of archetypal attraction that goes beyond psychology, into the realm where souls recognize each other across lifetimes. She found herself in the same emotional landscape again, loving someone who couldn't love her back the way she needed. Different face, different story, same ache in her chest, same pattern of giving more than she received, same hope that this time would be different, that her love would finally be enough to heal what was broken. In the quiet moments between hope and despair, she began to wonder, was she cursed to repeat this forever? Or was there something sacred hidden in the repetition itself? In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity. Each time he neared the summit, the stone would roll back down and he would begin again. Albert Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding meaning not in reaching the summit, but in the eternal act of pushing. Trauma repetition in relationships works the same way. You don't keep choosing the same type of person because you're broken. You keep returning to the same archetypal wound because your soul is trying to master it. Each relationship is another attempt to push the boulder of unhealed trauma to the summit of integration. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma reveals that unresolved wounds create what he calls repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate familiar pain in hopes of finally resolving it. Your nervous system doesn't seek what feels good. It seeks what feels familiar, and familiar often means similar to the original wound. This isn't masochism, it's the psyche's attempt to complete unfinished emotional business. Every time you choose someone who abandons you, you're trying to master abandonment. Every time you love someone unavailable, you're practicing loving the unavailable parts of yourself. He kept dating women who needed saving, addicts, artists with broken hearts, beautiful disasters who made him feel useful. He told himself he was just attracted to depth, to complexity, to people who had lived. But his therapist helped him see the pattern differently. Each woman was a version of his mother, brilliant, creative, and emotionally unreachable when she disappeared into her work. By saving them, he was trying to retroactively save her. By earning their love, he was trying to finally earn hers. Each relationship was a ritual attempt to rewrite his first experience of feminine love. Trauma specialist Dr. Peter Levine explains that repetition serves an evolutionary function. The nervous system keeps presenting you with variations of your original wound until you develop the resources to respond differently. What feels like being stuck in a loop is actually your system's way of offering you repeated opportunities for mastery. The key is recognizing when you're in the ritual and choosing consciousness over automaticity. When you can see the pattern while you're in it, you can begin to respond from your adult self rather than your wounded child. I used to believe that if I could just love someone perfectly enough, consistently enough, they would finally see my worth and choose me completely. Each relationship became a laboratory where I tested different formulas of devotion, thinking I could solve the equation of being loved. It took years to realize I wasn't trying to win their love. I was trying to convince the part of me that felt fundamentally unlovable that I deserved to be chosen. Every rejection was confirmation of my deepest fear. Every acceptance felt like temporary evidence that maybe I wasn't irredeemably flawed. The most profound shift happens when you stop seeing repetition as failure and start seeing it as initiation. Each relationship that activates your core wound is offering you another chance to heal what was never your fault, but is now your responsibility. You're not destined to repeat the same patterns forever. You're being given repeated opportunities to develop new responses, to choose differently, to love from wholeness rather than wound, to recognize when you're trying to earn what should be freely given. The boulder doesn't need to reach the summit. The healing happens in the choice to push it consciously rather than compulsively. In recognizing when you're in the familiar ritual and asking, what would love look like if I weren't trying to prove I deserve it? Sometimes the most radical act is not entering the familiar dance, not trying to save someone who doesn't want saving, not working for love that should flow freely, not making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for your full presence. But repetition isn't always individual. Sometimes two people meet, and their unconscious wounds begin to amplify each other in ways that create entirely new forms of suffering. The moment she recognized the pattern, everything changed. Not the relationship, that continued to be complicated, messy, sometimes painful, but her relationship to the relationship transformed. She stopped trying to change him and started noticing what he was activating in her. She stopped seeing his unavailability as rejection and started seeing it as an invitation to develop her own emotional self-sufficiency. The same relationship that had been her prison became her laboratory. The same dynamics that had tortured her became her teachers. Love stopped being something that happened to her and became something she was consciously participating in creating. In medieval alchemy, the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, was the process of transforming base metals into gold. But the real secret wasn't about metal at all. It was about transforming the unconscious aspects of the psyche into conscious awareness. The external work was always a metaphor for internal transformation. Conscious relationship works the same way. You stop trying to transform your partner and start using the relationship to transform yourself. Every trigger becomes information. Every conflict becomes an opportunity to reclaim a projected part of yourself. Every archetypal pattern becomes raw material for psychological gold. The first step in archetypal alchemy is learning to identify which internal characters are running your love life. When you feel abandoned, which part of you is activated? The wounded child who learned that love always leaves. When you feel suffocated, which archetypal figure surfaces? The rebel who equates intimacy with loss of self. Dr. Richard Schwartz's Internal Family Systems reveals that we all contain multiple archetypal parts. The protector who tries to prevent hurt, the exile who carries old wounds, the firefighter who tries to numb pain. Conscious relationship means learning to recognize when these parts are driving your responses rather than your adult self. Sarah noticed that she was constantly frustrated by her partner's emotional unavailability. Every time he withdrew, she felt panicked, abandoned, invisible. But when she started exploring this reaction, she discovered that emotional unavailability lived inside her too, as her own disconnection from her body, her own difficulty accessing and expressing feelings. Instead of demanding that he become more emotionally available, she began the work of becoming more emotionally available to herself. Paradoxically, as she stopped needing him to be her emotional interpreter, he began naturally opening up more. Archetypal integration doesn't mean getting rid of unconscious patterns. It means bringing them into conscious relationship. When the hero in you wants to rescue your partner, you can pause and ask, what part of me is seeking rescue right now? When the mother in you wants to overnurture, you can inquire, what in me is starving for care? This shifts the relationship from unconscious projection to conscious collaboration. Instead of two people acting out their unhealed archetypes on each other, you become two people supporting each other's integration process. Dr. Arnold Mindell's process work suggests that relationship conflicts often represent incomplete psychological gestures seeking resolution. The part of you that keeps choosing unavailable partners might be trying to develop healthy independence. The part that keeps attracting chaos might be learning to embrace your own wild nature. When you can see the teaching embedded in the pattern, you can begin to complete the gesture consciously. Instead of endlessly repeating the pattern hoping for a different outcome, you can extract the wisdom and graduate from the lesson. Emma realized she had been unconsciously attracted to emotionally complex partners because they activated her problem-solving abilities, the part of her that felt valuable when figuring out puzzles. But she also recognized that this pattern kept her from experiencing simple, present-moment intimacy. The alchemical choice wasn't to force herself to date only simple, uncomplicated people. It was to develop the capacity to be attracted to depth without needing it to come wrapped in dysfunction, to seek complexity in consciousness rather than unconsciousness. In conscious relationship, your partner becomes a living mirror, reflecting back your unconscious patterns, disowned aspects, and unlived potentials. Instead of trying to break the mirror, when you don't like what you see, you use it as a tool for self-discovery. This doesn't mean staying in relationships that are harmful or enabling dysfunction in the name of growth. It means bringing awareness to why you're attracted to what you're attracted to, and consciously choosing to develop the qualities you've been seeking externally. We've journeyed deep into the invisible forces that shape our love stories. If these archetypal patterns are resonating with your own experience, I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. What archetypes do you recognize in your relationship history? Which shadows are you ready to integrate? If this exploration has been meaningful for you, please consider subscribing to join our community of souls committed to conscious love and archetypal awareness. And stay tuned for the next video, where we'll explore how to navigate the path forward once you've awakened to these patterns. But recognizing archetypal patterns is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when you learn to love beyond the roles. There comes a moment in every conscious person's journey when they realize they've been living in a play they never auditioned for, speaking lines written by wounds they didn't choose, playing roles inherited from stories that began before they were born. The mother who gives until empty, the father who loves through distance, the hero who saves everyone but themselves, the villain who teaches through pain. These aren't who you are. They're costumes your soul has been wearing while searching for its way home to itself. The deepest teaching of archetypal awareness is this: you are not your patterns. You are the consciousness that can observe them, choose them, or transcend them. You are not the wounded child seeking the perfect parent. You are not the hero compelled to rescue. You are not the mother who must nurture everyone except herself. You are the one who can witness these archetypal energies moving through you and consciously decide which ones serve love and which ones serve old survival strategies that are no longer needed. Loving beyond the roles doesn't mean rejecting your archetypal nature. The mother in you has gifts of nurturing that the world needs. The hero in you has courage that can serve authentic purposes. The sage in you carries wisdom worth sharing. The invitation is to express these archetypes from choice rather than compulsion, from wholeness rather than wound. When you love from the integrated self, rather than from unconscious archetypal fragments, you stop needing your partner to complete your mythology. You stop requiring them to play the missing character in your internal drama. You can appreciate their archetypal gifts without needing them to heal your archetypal wounds. Dr. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Conscious relationship becomes a sacred container for this becoming. Not two halves seeking to make a whole, but two whole people supporting each other's continued unfolding. In this kind of love, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself more completely. You don't merge, you meet. You don't complete each other. You witness each other's completeness and celebrate each other's growth into fuller expressions of authentic being. This shift from unconscious to conscious loving happens in small daily choices. The choice to pause when triggered and ask, which archetypal part of me is activated right now? The choice to express a need directly rather than hoping your partner will intuitively provide what you've never asked for. The choice to take responsibility for your own emotional regulation rather than making your partner responsible for managing your internal weather. The choice to love your partner for who they are rather than for how well they heal who you were. Even in consciousness, love remains mysterious. You may understand your patterns, integrate your shadows, and love from wholeness, and still be surprised by the alchemy that happens when two souls choose to grow together. Understanding the psychology of love doesn't diminish its magic. It deepens your capacity to participate in it consciously. The goal isn't to solve the mystery of attraction or eliminate the beautiful complexity of human connection. It's to engage with both from a place of awareness rather than unconscious automaticity. The relationships that break you open are not your punishment. They are your initiation. The people who trigger your deepest wounds are not your enemies. They are your unconscious collaborators in healing. The patterns you repeat are not your failure. They are your soul's curriculum. When you can love beyond the roles, beyond the projections, beyond the unconscious scripts inherited from your lineage, you discover something extraordinary. You don't need to be saved, completed, or healed by another person. You are already whole. And from that wholeness, you can choose to love, not from need but from abundance, not from wound but from wonder, not because you must, but because you can. Love, in its most conscious form, is not about finding your missing half. It's about two complete people choosing to create something beautiful together.